Hi, my name is Matthew DeSaro, and today I'm going to talk to you all about the early history of educational language learning software and my great-uncle George Earl DeSaro's contribution to the field. George Earl DeSaro, who incidentally is 89 years old today, is my paternal grandfather's younger brother. He lives in San Antonio, Texas, and back in the early 1980s, he developed some of the world's first educational language learning software for the Apple II. I have been, as many of you know, from my website, www.desarodesigns.com, and my contribution to various online forums, an amateur historian of technology. And ever since I learned about Uncle George's contribution to the early history of Apple II software, I have been looking for a copy of his program. This started when I was about 11 years old in 1999. And some 20 years later, last October 2020, I finally found a copy for sale on eBay. This is the second software title he released, called the French Hangman. The first one was the Spanish Hangman, and I have not yet located a copy of that one. So what we're going to be doing today is attempting to run this software for the first time in probably 30 years on an Apple IIe, which my dear Uncle George gave me when I was 11 and first got interested in this project. Unfortunately, the Apple II that he used to develop this software is been lost to time. But I do have a rare and very nice copy of the Apple II reference manual, Steve Wozniak's famous Red Book, which he actually used as a reference when developing the software. The Apple IIe computer is in working condition, and we will be using a program called ADT Pro to transfer it, that is, transfer Uncle George's software to a modern Linux PC for preservation on archive.org. For those of you who would like to try the software for yourselves, a link will be posted in below this video to the archive.org online emulator. Thank you. Okay, here goes nothing. Here's the software disk. Insert that into first disk drive. Warm up the monitor. And here goes nothing. Wow, that's really cool. I had no idea he had done such sophisticated graphics in 1981. Okay, let's try number 1 on vocabulary. Let's try to translate some words to English. I don't know French, so this may be a bit interesting. Okay, P, F, uh-oh, no G, uh-oh, let's try that again. Well, I know that the should be D-E, so nope. Uh-oh, there's... Let's try... There we go, L-E. A in it. And... no K. try an R. Aha! Let's try a Y. I think I might know what this word is. So there we go. Now the other thing we'll notice, he's not using the built-in characters. He's created his own font, actually quite sophisticated for this era. Okay, I think that this software really does work. So the next thing we're going to try, and this is going to be very cool, is attempt to transfer the software from its original disk, which, by the way, Uncle George said was lightly copy protected, so hopefully this will work, using ADT Pro to my Linux computer over here. So what we're going to do here is actually remove the master disk, which is write protected, there are no cutouts, put that into disk 2, and disk 1 is going to be the transfer software. We're just going to do a reset. Okay, I have a Ubuntu Linux machine over here running the ADT Pro server, and I've got it hooked up with an Apple II Super serial card to a just USB serial on the Linux side. So let's try serial transfer. And we're going to select the correct volume, which is going to be volume 2 here. That wasn't a good sign. Let's try that one more time. It's been a lot of years since I used this Duo disk. It's always possible that there's a problem with the disk. Alright, I'm going to try putting the French Hangman back into drive 1 here. Interesting. I do wonder, this disk may genuinely be copy protected. Okay, so our first attempt to preserve my great Uncle George's The French Hangman software using a regular standard Apple II disk image format, a .dsk file, was not successful because, as he had told me once, he copy protected the disk. So the solution for copy protected Apple II disks that the community has accepted is the really quite amazing Applesauce project done by John K. Morris, which is a special piece of hardware that you can hook up a regular Apple II disk drive to and use the hardware to read each flux transition, each actual magnetic transition off of each track of the disk, and then it creates a file called a .waz file that encodes all of that information. Unfortunately, I am still on the waiting list to receive mine. I wasn't one of the lucky few to get the very first order of them when they came out. So instead, what we're going to try here is a much older method that actually dates from the days when people were pirating Apple II software for, that still had commercial value. And that's a software tool called, creatively, Saltines Super Transcopy, or SST. And this was used by pirates back in the day to copy a disk and then send the copy-protected disk image over a modem to a team of people who would try to figure out how to remove the protection so it could be pirated. However, obviously we're not doing anything illegal like that here. I have the permission of my great uncle to do this, but it's still a very useful tool. So the way it works is that it copies the individual tracks of an Apple II disk and stores them on 2, or both sides of 1, additional disk. And then you can take these 2 disks and transfer them as regular disk images over a modem, or in this case just using the ADT Pro software, And then we can put the two disk images back together inside an emulator to make what's known as a .nib file, for a nibble file. And that file format is what the final software will be preserved as if we can make this work. So I'm going to boot up SST and give this a go. Warm up the monitor for a moment. So now that SST has started, we're going to place the precious original disk in drive 2. SST is still in drive 1. And we're going to select option B. And interestingly, it's labeled pirate a disk. I would prefer the term archive. And then we select the option to pack the disk, that is to read the individual tracks and put them on another disk in the in a format that we can read and transfer. So that's called pack. Now it lets you set up how you're going to do the tracks. It'll let you half step or quarter step. I'm pretty sure he didn't do anything quite that sophisticated. I think it's just a non-standard header, but we will see. Alright, so it says to insert both disks, so we're going to take the SST disk out, put that one away, and then put the original disk in the drive 1, and we're going to put SST transfer disk 1 into drive 2, and hit go. As you can see, it's reading each track from the source disk, compressing it, and storing it in a more readable format on the second disk. On the left of the screen up here, we have track 0 to track 35. Read the numbers vertically. Okay, so it's finished copying the first half of the French Hangman disk. So it says to turn it over. I don't have the other side of this disk punched, so I'm just going to use a second disk. And it'll copy the second half. So put that in there. And go. Steve Wozniak is widely considered a genius for his ability to use such a small amount of hardware to achieve the really quite impressive performance for its time of the Apple II. But that came at the cost of not having a lot of, well, the cost or benefit of not having a lot of controller chips in between the CPU and the actual hardware, which led to a lot of room for creative programming, shall we say, and hence all the varying copy protection schemes. So it looks like it finished successfully as it can tell. It's not really going to know yet. So we can press return here, and now we've got both disks with the packed tracks on them. So now we need to transfer these two disks over to the Linux box over here, where we're running the ADT Pro server. So this is going to be receiving those two tracks. So to do that, we're going to take out the precious original here. We're hopefully done with that now if everything went well. And we're going to put our ADT Pro back in. So we're going to use this to actually do the transfer. So put that in and use a serial port. So just select the first option. Okay, and we're going to be sending as opposed to receiving, so we're going to be sending a file name, and the file we're going to be sending here is going to be called HM for Hangman, and then it's going to be the what they call the front, so the front side. Okay. Oops. So we need to put the transfer disk 1 into the drive. rescan. There we go. So that's the first disk. That's going to be the first half of the track. So we'll send that. If you look over here briefly at the laptop, you can see the little server here. The ADT Pro server is nicely receiving the data as it's being sent. It is really pretty amazing how RS-232 serial is such a long standard. I work in oceanographic instruments, and we still use it to this day for sending oceanographic data. And here it is, back in the early 80s and even the early 70s, it was already in use. So we've completed the first disk. So now we're going to send the second disk worth of tracks, SST transfer disk 2. So again, HM, but now instead of front, it's back. That's how they name them. And once again, the Hangman, the no name disk, which has the second half of the tracks on it. Okay, so now that we have all the files transferred, thank you ADT Pro, that's a pretty nice program. We're going to be using another piece of software here called Applewin, which is well, as they say, Apple IIe emulator for Windows, and I'm actually running it on Linux here in Wine, but it works very nicely, and it's a nice emulator I've used for years. So what we've done here is we've transferred the two disks over a modem, quote unquote, and now we're going to use the same SST software, but now in the emulator, to put them back together into a working disk. So we have our Applewin here, and we have our trans copy. As I said, the trans copy uses image files in a .nib format. So we're going to take the blank one, that's what we're going to be copying onto, and we're going to be putting it into the Applewin directory. And we're going to be naming this. We're going to name this the actual name, because this is going to get the final disk on it, hopefully. So this is going to be called the French Hangman, just like the original, but of course it's just blank right now. And then we need those two regular .disk DSK files, which we called HM back and HM front. So that's what we're going to be copying from. And of course we're going to need the SST disk. Alright, so what we do here is we put into the first drive of the Apple II, we're going to put the SST.dsk file, and then the second disk, this is going to be what we're going to be copying onto, which is the French Hangman. So with that, we start the emulator, and there's the trans copy, comes right up. So these are the directions that comes with the SST software. And there's one little gotcha, and that is that there's a bug in SST where it fails to move the head, they call it the disk arm here, but it's the head, back to track 0 on drive 2. So what we're going to do is use this Copy 2 Plus program on the same disk as the SST to move that head back to 0 before we start, just to make sure that we end up writing all the data onto the right tracks. So there we go, and we're just going to pretend that we want to use the track editor to edit a track, or a sector editor, I mean, and so we can force it to go to 0, 0. So we're going to go track 0, sector 0, and there it just read track 0, sector 0 on drive B. And then we're just going to reboot the emulator, and that assures that that emulated disk head is at track 0. So we're going to open up SST now. and we're going to once again select the pirate a disk, but now we want to unpack. We want to take those two disks that we made and put them back together into one. So we're going to go unpack, and the same parameters we packed with. Okay, so we're going to insert both disks. So in this case, the first disk is going to be the Hangman front, and the second disk is going to be the .nib, which contains the finished program. So now it's doing the same thing you saw it do in real life on the real Apple, but in emulated land and in reverse. So it's copying from the original disk, which has the tracks in the compressed format, onto the duplicate, which should hopefully end up containing a working copy of The French Hangman by George Earl. Okay, so now it says to turn the data disk over and press return. So that means we're going to switch from the front image to the back image here, and keep going. Okay, so it says it's done, the process is finished. So now for the moment of truth, we're going to take disk 1 and we're going to put in the newly created nibble file called The French Hangman, and we're going to see what it does. And that's a really good sign. What do you know? That's really cool. Thank you, Salty. So we can give this another quick little try. So we'll try one in vocabulary here. Let's try an A. Didn't like that. Let's try a C. Uh-oh. Let's try a W. Aha! Maybe an E? Hooray! So we have it working. Well, that pretty much sums it up. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this helps you if you need to transfer an old Apple II program. And I really hope that you take the time to go check out the link below this video where you can actually play one of the world's very first educational language learning tools, at least for the Apple II, by my dear great uncle, George Earl DeSaro. So here's a shout out to you, Uncle George. I love you, and thank you so much for inspiring me in my career in computers at such a young age.